Welcome to ranking incest in media based on how horrifying and how unnecessary it is to the plot. Through comments, private messages, and my own research, I have gathered over 100 examples of incest in modern media that I am now collating into one master list to mainly show just how unnecessary and overused incest is used in media these days. And I want to make it clear that for this list, I will be adding more weight to what is necessary to the plot compared to what is horrifying incest-wise, because I want to make it very clear that it is often overused to an unnecessary degree. For everyone who's been here from the previous 10 rankings that have been on TikTok, I want to thank you and welcome you back to the master list. Not all of these instances are actual cases of technical incest. They are just cases where both a familial and a romantic bond have been established between two or more characters. Why even include them on the list if it's not technically even incest? Well, what I'm trying to show is that oftentimes these familial dynamics that are introduced to the characters are not needed for the plot. Sometimes they are relevant to the plot, but also there could have been workarounds that they could have done to make it not a family dynamic. I'm looking specifically at you step-siblings. Why are you always in a relationship with each other in media? But without further ado, let's get right into the list. Coming in at number 100, we have Jackie, Cole, and Alex from My Life with the Walter Boys. After Jackie's entire family is killed in New York City, she is sent to cowboy country to live with her mother's friend's family. This includes an enormous and extortionate amount of children. From her arrival, Jackie is pretty much immediately thrown into a bit of a love triangle between two of the children there, Cole and Alex. There is no blood relation between these characters. While it is kind of a foster environment, all of them are aware that this is not an actual family bond. They are aware that they are taking her in because she has gone through something horrific, but they are not actually related to each other. She does feel platonic and almost brotherly affection towards some of the other children in the show, but never to Cole and Alex. It is always immediately romantic. Coming in at number 99, we have Katniss and Gale from the Hunger Games. These two, not related. Katniss does at the very beginning of the novel say that she views Gale as sort of a brother, as a brotherly figure. However, it's kind of clear that Gale does feel a bit more affection towards her. Katniss is then sent into the Hunger Games, and she gets into this star-crossed lover situation with another character. The Capitol, the people running the Hunger Games, then go back to interview people from home, and they realize that Gale is way too attractive to just be a friend of hers. And so the Capitol presents Gale as Katniss's cousin to the rest of Panem. But Katniss and Gale are not blood related. They know this, everyone who is important to them knows this. The only people who don't know this are the people they don't care about anyway. Coming in at 98, we have Belly, Conrad, and Jeremiah from The Summer I Turned Pretty. I had a lot of people in my comments telling me that Belly, Conrad, and Jeremiah gave them very strong cousin vibes and it icked them out, which is completely fair for your personal opinion. However, Belly, Conrad, and Jeremiah are not related. The reason that a lot of people compare them to cousins is because when they grow up, each summer, Belly, Conrad, Jeremiah, and Belly's brother Stephen join together because their mothers are best friends, and so they meet up in Cape Cod and they spend summers together, which is something that a lot of cousins do. However, it's very important and needs to be known that at no point were they ever raised together like siblings were. They are also incredibly aware that they are not related to each other. The only time it does get a little weird is when Adam, Conrad and Jeremiah's father, refers to Belly as their little sister, despite the fact that Adam is aware that both of his sons have dated this girl at one point. Coming in at 97, we have Roger and Brianna from Outlander. Outlander is a time travel show, and so the relationships do get a little bit convoluted, especially with Brianna. Brianna's father is Jamie Fraser. He is from the 1700s. Jamie's uncle is Dougal, also from the 1700s. Dougal's descendant of many, many generations is Roger, who was born in, I believe, the 1940s. So there is a technical relation between Roger and Brianna, but it is so far removed and so distant that it doesn't really have an effect on them incest-wise. It is also, unfortunately, incredibly relevant to the plot of the show because it's how the magic system works, and it is very important that Roger is Dougal's descendant by the person that Dougal had a relationship with. In 96, we have Percy and Annabeth from the Percy Jackson series. This one I find particularly funny because Rick Riordan had to literally shoehorn in a plot device to make it very explicitly clear that these two characters were not related. And this comes in like the third or fourth book, so you can tell that people were starting to question him a little bit. Percy and Annabeth are both children of the Greek gods. Different Greek gods, but the Greek gods nonetheless. If anyone knows anything about Greek mythology, then you know that all of the Greek gods are somewhat related in some sort of way, which would mean that Percy and Annabeth would technically be cousins. However, Rick Riordan, the author, made it explicitly clear that because the Greek gods are gods, they do not have human DNA. It doesn't work that way, and therefore Percy and Annabeth are not actually biologically related to each other. To be clear, they do not share the same DNA. They are not considered cousins in any capacity or any form, therefore they are not related. I just find it really amusing that he had to literally force that into the plot and make it a plot point to make it very clear that these two characters are not doing anything untoward. In 95, we have Magenta and Riff Raff from the Rocky Horror Picture Show. The Rocky Horror Picture Show is a sci-fi dystopian cult classic that I recommend everyone watches at least once in their lifetime. The entire film is about dismantling prejudices against uncomfortable and risque relationships. It's about freedom of expression, to love who you want, to engage in the sort of kinks that you want to engage in without any sort of shame. Magenta and Riff Raff are never explicitly in a sexual relationship in this film, but it is very implicit, and they are siblings, but their relationship fits in so well within the theme and the genre of the show that I do think it's worth pointing out that it is super necessary to the plot. Coming in at 94, we have Mia and Nicholas from The Princess Diaries 2. For plot reasons, these two characters needed to be related. There are only two potential heirs to this throne, and that is Mia and Nicholas, and it puts them in an enemies to lovers sort of situation. However, that does mean that they have to have some sort of common ancestor, and the ancestor they have is way far back, like great-great-great-great-grandfather or something, so many generations back that the DNA has been completely dispersed and forgotten about. It is extremely plot relevant, however, you do watch the film kind of knowing that these two characters have to be related in order for the plot to work. In 93, we have Derek and Casey from Life with Derek. Derek and Casey are step-siblings with insane levels of chemistry. However, they never do anything explicit. It is very much a kid's show, and they don't ever go further than that. But it did have a lot of viewers wondering and questioning, and many of them hoping for something to happen. In 92, we have Jake and Claire from Degrassi. These two characters meet in school, start dating, and then their parents start dating. So Jake and Claire decide to stop dating, and then realize that they actually might be better off as siblings, and go to that route instead. Which, if you were put in this position, this is, I think, the ideal outcome. So good for them compared to a lot of others that are coming up. And coming in at 91, we have Victor and Elizabeth from Frankenstein. I have been very reticent to include any form of older media because a lot of times it is a bit more convoluted. The context is a very important thing that we need to take into consideration. Victor and Elizabeth are cousins. During the 1800s, this was not only accepted, it was encouraged, especially for women, because women didn't have property. They didn't have possessions of their own, and so to keep their property and possessions, they kind of had to marry within their own family because all of their worth was going to the man. However, I am including Victor and Elizabeth purely because Elizabeth was kind of adopted into the family to be a companion to Victor. So she was raised with him, and then they got together later on. I do think this works within the context of Frankenstein and what Frankenstein is. It is very much about isolation and loneliness, and it is very much a gothic horror book, which is why they are down in 91. Coming in at 90, rounding off the first 10, we have Rajel and Nika from The Tearsmith. Rajel and Nika are essentially raised in the same orphanage. They are aware they're not siblings. They are raised around many different children. They don't even really interact at the orphanage at all. And then when they are teenagers, they are adopted into the same family. Nika was going to be adopted, and then Rajel wowed the family so much that they took him along as well. They are not raised as siblings. They only get that family dynamic established once they are brought together as teenagers in the same family. However, this is also the point where they start spending time together for the first time in their lives, and they realize that they do have more romantic feelings and affections towards each other. And so they have a sibling dynamic for about 0.2 seconds. Even then, it's not affectionate, and then they immediately progress into romantic. In 89th place, we have Otis and Orla from Sex Education. Otis and Orla get into a romantic relationship pretty much at the exact same time that their parents do. They are not related by any means. They are never raised as siblings, but they are brought into a very uncomfortable situation with their parents when everyone starts dating each other. What the early seasons of Sex Education did really well was exploring different types of romantic relationships and different types of sexual expression. And so Otis and Orla are kind of another part of that. The only reason they're higher up on the list than the others is because I would question how exactly necessary it was to the plot, and by this I mean Otis and Orla as a couple rather than their parents, who made significantly more sense. But I don't think it's horrifying by any means, definitely not incest. Coming in at 88, we have Jackson and Maggie from Grey's Anatomy. Maggie has a biological dad who she has never considered her actual father. She very much considers her stepfather to be her actual father. It's Maggie's biological dad who marries Jackson's mother, and this is how the characters are introduced to each other. It's also worth noting that this is when they are full-grown adults. They are never a family unit. They are only connected through Maggie's biological father. The only reason they're higher up on this list is because I would question just how necessary it was to introduce them in this way. It feels like a very convoluted way to push two characters together when there were so many easier things they could have done. And in 87, we have the first entry on the list to receive a 10 out of 10 for horrifying levels of incest. We have Ode-Soo and Mido from Oldboy. Oldboy is a Korean film, and it's a sort of retelling of the Oedipus complex. It's a revenge story within a revenge story where Ode-Soo is essentially tricked into having a sexual and romantic relationship with his own daughter, having spent years in prison and never really getting to know her. Neither of them are aware of this at the time, and the film is meant to challenge your perception of reality and make you question what you would do in certain situations. It really bends the bounds of what is acceptable. And so while it gets a 10 out of 10 for horrifying, it is so incredibly necessary to the plot. It's the whole point of the film. And I do not think we should be afraid of depicting things like incest if it is done in a way that is meant to question it, is meant to challenge it, and is meant to actually look at it through a more critical lens. On a similar vein, coming in at 86, we have Everyone from Flowers in the Attic. The whole point of Flowers in the Attic is the trauma that this family goes through and how you can find comfort and companionship in any place you can, that you will search for it even within your own family if that is the only choice you have. The incest itself is intrinsically linked with the trauma that these characters go through, and is thus incredibly necessary to the plot. Coming in at 85, we have Norma and Norman from Bates Motel. Again, similar to the previous two, this does try to go through their relationship through a more critical lens. Norma and Norman are mother and son. Their explicit, but not actually that explicit, relationship is the bedrock of the show. It explains all of their choices, and it explains their characters very well. Coming in at 84, we have Charles and Gina from Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Charles and Gina dated, then they broke up, and then their parents got together, which is all fine and dandy because there's no cross lines there whatsoever, except for the fact that Charles does repeatedly refer to Gina as his sister that he boned. This is incredibly in keeping with Charles's character. That is true. However, it is just a case of incest-like jokes being used as a gag throughout a sitcom, which is incredibly common and incredibly repetitive, and you will see happens more often than you might realize. In 83, we have Lestat and Gabrielle from The Vampire Chronicles. These two characters are mother and son. Gabrielle is Lestat's mother, and she raises him throughout his childhood. Lestat is then turned into a vampire, and much later he turns Gabrielle into a vampire, essentially becoming the vampiric parent of his own mother. They essentially become both parent and child to each other. They do separate for a while, and then they come back together and become very amorous with each other, kissing and making out and just doing a lot of stuff. However, it is quite relevant to the plot. It does explain Lestat's character incredibly well. It explains his motivations, it explains his actions, which is why it is quite necessary to the plot. In 82, we have Ivy and Charles from August Osage County. This is a play set in rural Oklahoma. It is about an incredibly dysfunctional family, a family that fights all the time, a family that does not get on with each other in any capacity. Charles and Ivy are in a relationship. They find comfort in really only each other. It's mainly about Ivy and the comfort she finds in Charles. And then it is revealed later on in the play that they are half siblings. And Ivy runs away from this. She's absolutely horrified by the news. Since the whole play is about a dysfunctional family, this reveal is in keeping with the play, and it's less meant to be shocking and more meant to be tragic. It's a tragic depiction that even when she tries to escape her family, she can't. Coming in at 81, we have Arno and Elise from Assassin's Creed. These two characters met as children, and then Arno's entire family is killed, and he is essentially adopted into Elise's family and raised with her. They are very well aware that they are not siblings, but they are raised together, and then later on they do get into a romantic relationship. Not technically incest, quite necessary to the plot. Coming in at number 80, we have Frankie and JJ from Hollyoaks. You'll be seeing a number of soap operas on this list, and this is one that is by far the lowest in the list compared to any others. It is an incredibly dark storyline. It is about twin siblings in an abusive relationship. To give credit to Hollyoaks, they did work with various charities and support channels in order to depict this storyline quite well. The reason it's higher up on the list compared to other ones that looked at the incest with a critical lens is because they could have done it a little better. It dragged out at the end, and they made make the story a little bit too convoluted. Another incredibly dark storyline coming in at 79, we have Veronica and Duncan from Veronica Mars. This includes both sexual assault and drug use. Throughout the entirety of season 1, Veronica is trying to uncover the identity of her rapist. She was at a party and she was drugged and she can't remember any of the night, but she is aware that she was raped or had sex. We later find out that it was Duncan. However, he was also drugged at the party and he claims that they had consensual sex, but the reason that he didn't want to tell her was because he had found out that they might be half siblings and he didn't want her to live with that horror. The fact that they might have been half siblings and had this sexual dynamic with them as ex-boyfriends and then this horrible incident together, it was necessary to the plot. It definitely was, but it could have been done a lot better. Coming in at 78, we have Edgar and Shelley from Bat Boy the Musical. Bat Boy is a horror musical based on a fabricated article about a half bat, half boy. People did start to actually believe it, and it was meant to be kind of believed in the way of like the Onion articles these days. Edgar and Shelley get together, and then it is later revealed that they are fraternal siblings. This then leads to a series of tragic and yet very inevitable events. It's incredibly crucial to the show. It does make the show, however, it's a little kitsch. Coming in at 77, we have the second entry from this show with Norma and Caleb from Bates Motel. Unlike with Norma and her son Norman, this one is explicit. These are two siblings who procreate together and have a son called David. This was not a healthy relationship, nor was it even consensual, nor could it have been consensual because it happened when Norma was incredibly young. The show does well to portray Caleb as completely awful, and it does explain why Norma is the way that she is. Coming in at 76, we have Bojack and Sarah Lynn from BoJack Horseman. These two characters are not related, but the entire relationship, I will point out, is incredibly dysfunctional and toxic. BoJack is the parental father figure to Sarah Lynn from when she's incredibly young. It needs to be pointed out that Sarah Lynn had a very toxic and horrible relationship from an abusive father. BoJack and Sarah Lynn are not good to each other. They encourage each other's bad habits. They encourage the worst parts of themselves. When Sarah Lynn is much older, around 30, they do end up having sex. And a lot of fans were absolutely livid by this because it was just another of Sarah Lynn's parental figures abusing her in some way, or taking advantage of her, I should say. Coming in at 75, we have Marcia and Greg from A Very Brady Sequel. This is a satire film of the Brady Bunch show. Marcia and Greg are step-siblings who are introduced to each other when they're a bit older. They're like in their teenage years. It's always been kind of joked by fans who watched the original Brady Bunch show that they have some sort of chemistry with each other, that there's something more going on there. And so in A Very Brady Sequel, they kind of lean into that a bit more. Marcia and Greg are having a rivalry over who gets the better room in the attic, and it ends up that Marcia does give Greg the room, but they share a passionate kiss right before the end of this. It felt completely unnecessary in the story, but that was the point of the satire in a way. In 74th position, we have Andy and Lele from The Coffin of Andy and Lele. This is our second video game entry on this list. Andy and Lele are full-blood siblings in an incredibly toxic relationship with each other. However, necessary to the plot. The game is essentially a character study of these two characters. It looks at them through a very critical lens and the choices they make and the choices that they're forced to make. It essentially becomes like an unraveling of their psyches. However, some fans of the game have noted that it does make them uncomfortable in a way that isn't actually effective in the point that they're trying to make. Coming in at 73, we have Stephanie and Chris from A Simple Favor. Stephanie is one of the main characters in A Simple Favor, and it is found out by another character that at her father's funeral, Stephanie slept with her half-brother. It is very much used as a plot point. Stephanie is blackmailed with this information later on. One of the most horrifying parts of this is that Stephanie is not sure whether her child is her husband's or her half-brother's. Ridiculous, honestly. Coming in at 72, we have Jeff and Fallon from the original Dynasty. This is a classic soap opera twist. Jeff and Fallon are in a relationship, they get married, it's all beautiful, and then they find out later on that they are half cousins. Considering Jeff and Fallon are one of the central romances in the show, this is quite a shocking twist. Coming in at 71, we have Luke and Leia from Star Wars. These two are twins, and then they share a kiss. Specifically, Leia kisses Luke, and then nothing else happens. However, I do think it is worth noting that when they find out that they are twins, Leia very much says that she always had a feeling about this, which makes you question why she kissed her brother then. Coming in at 70, we're 30 down now, we have Justin and Rebecca from Brothers and Sisters. These two believe that they are half-siblings. However, they do already have an attraction towards each other. When they find out that they are not actually related, they get the go-ahead to then start a romantic relationship, which is all fine and dandy, there's no crossover. However, the feelings were already established. They already had attraction to each other. Don't you just love it when you find out that the person you thought you were related to your whole life isn't actually related to you, so you can finally embark on that romantic relationship you've always secretly wanted? No. Coming in at 69, we have Jimmy and Jillian from Boardwalk Empire. This is an abusive mother and son relationship. Boardwalk Empire is a crime show that essentially turns into a dysfunctional family dynamic show with this storyline. Jimmy is one of the main characters in Boardwalk Empire, and he is born from Jillian's rape by a very powerful man when she was very, very young. She then essentially imparts this trauma onto Jimmy. This abuse does explain Jimmy's character very well, however, she doesn't need to seduce him the way that she does in the show. That in itself wasn't as necessary. It felt just more of a way to shock the viewer by actually showing it on screen. Coming in at 68, we have Margot and Richie from the Royal Tenenbaums. This is a Wes Anderson film, so you know there's going to be some weird dynamics anyway. Margot and Richie are adopted siblings. They are raised like siblings from when they are children, very young, so they essentially see each other as siblings. Well, Margot does, Richie does not. Richie has an insane and prevailing infatuation with Margot that follows throughout the entire film. It stemmed from when they were children and continues into adulthood, and it is super uncomfortable. Coming in at 67, we have Brenda and Billy from 6 Feet Under. This is similar to the Royal Tenenbaums, except these are blood siblings, so significantly worse. Billy is in love with Brenda. It is portrayed as a more complicated relationship, however, it is still very odd. Billy does attempt to kind of insert himself into a lot of Brenda's life and her relationships, preventing her from ever really forming attachments with other people. They attempt to do it through a more critical lens, could have been done better. Coming in at 66, we have Fiona and Declan from Degrassi. These two are twins, and in an act to make someone else jealous, Fiona kisses Declan in a very public space. This sounds insane, and it was. However, this was used as a plot device to show just how bad Fiona's mental health had gotten. And it was very effective at doing that. Coming in at 65, we have Peggy and Frank from Cool the Midwife. This is a solo episode of Cool the Midwife. It is about two deeply traumatized children who grew up in the workhouses of London. They are separated from when they are very young, and then they come back together when they're a little bit older, and they only essentially have each other in the world. They spend their whole lives just together. They become more than best friends. They become more than soulmates, more than platonic, more than romantic. They are each other's person in every way imaginable. When they are significantly older, Frank's health starts deteriorating, and they go to get help. And the caretakers at this place essentially discover their sexual relationship with each other, knowing they are also siblings. And they are initially horrified, while the other half of them are also like, but they only had each other. We can't judge. We can't look at the situation in any certain way other than these two people only had each other in the world. This story is meant to be deeply tragic, and it very much is. It is incredibly necessary to the plot. However, I will say that the caretakers' reactions did make me question whether they were trying to push some sort of agenda more than anything, but that's a very subtle thing. It's the only reason it's this high up on the list. Coming in at 64, we have Adrian and Max from The Secret Life of the American Teenager. These are step siblings who date and then break up. Sounds relatively fine in the whole grand scheme of things. I mean, you shouldn't really be dating your step-sibling where possible, but you know, it's not the most horrifying thing on the planet. What is slightly horrifying, though, is that Adrian does then go around telling everyone that she dated her brother, and that she was in love with her brother. On a very similar vein, in 63, we have Nick and Noah from My Fault. I'm talking specifically about the Spanish version of these films because the British version doesn't do it to this degree. Nick and Noah are step-siblings who are introduced to each other when they are both pretty much adults. Noah, however, is 17, Nick is, I think, 21. Say about that what you will. Immediately from their first interaction, there is hostility and there is attraction. They never even attempt to be siblings. They just go straight into a romantic relationship. However, it should be noted that Nick, on multiple occasions, so many occasions, calls Noah his sister. So many times, even right before making out with her. This is not something that Noah returns. Noah never wants to view Nick as her brother. She doesn't even attempt to. Nick, however, loves blurring those lines in a way that makes me deeply, deeply uncomfortable. Coming in at 62, we have Brandon and Callie from The Fosters. These two are raised in the same household. They are introduced to each other when they are teenagers. They're not blood related. It is very much a foster home. However, their relationship does put Callie and her brother's place in the foster home at risk, which makes it an annoying plot to watch, because you're watching Callie do something that she doesn't have to do that actively puts them at risk from being in the only foster home that they've actually ever really liked. And it doesn't place Callie as a likable character, which is in itself annoying because she doesn't do this once, she does it twice. Coming in at 61, we have the couple that inspired this entire series, Francois and Isaac from Wednesday. This is not explicit, but it is weird. These are siblings who were separated when they were teenagers because Isaac died. Many years later, Francois is then imprisoned. After she is released from her imprisonment and Isaac is brought back to life still as a teenager, they come back together and reunite. When they are reunited, they get back into an extremely close relationship where every scene you're watching them in makes you shiver. Wednesday is a horror show with a lot of uncomfortable relationships, so this does kind of fit into the genre of that, and a lot of you might be thinking, why is this so high up on this list? I don't get it if it fits in with that, like the Rocky Horror Picture Show. And that is because Wednesday offered zero explanation for this, zero critical lens. There was no reason for this to exist in any capacity. Coming in at 60, we have Ross and Monica from Friends. One of the most iconic sibling duos in sitcoms, Ross and Monica discover when they're a lot older in their adulthood that they had a very uncomfortable moment together when they were teenagers. Ross is describing the first kiss he ever had with the love of his life, Rachel. It was at a college party, it was beautiful. However, Monica and Chandler, who are married at this point, are a little confused by the story. It doesn't seem to add up, and that's when Monica realizes that it wasn't with Rachel, it was with her. Ross and Monica are both disgusted by this fact. The realization that they kissed each other, that Ross's first kiss with Rachel was with his sister, and that Monica's first kiss ever was with her brother. Such a tiny little plot point. It's used as a gag, and the reason it is so high up on the list is because it was completely unnecessary to the plot. It's just a case of a weird bit of incest being used as a laugh. Coming in at 59, we have George Michael and Maybe from Arrested Development. These two spend their whole lives raised as cousins. However, they are not technically related because Maybe's mother is technically adopted into the family, so there's no blood relation there, but they are raised knowing that they are cousins. And they have a relationship that prevails throughout the entire show. They end up married and stay married to the very end. Arrested Development is one of the sitcoms that really does lean into the wackiness that sitcoms afford. However, this is a prevailing issue with sitcoms, that they often do use incest or incest-like relationships as a gag, as a joke, as a running motif throughout the entire thing. This is, I think, the prime example of that. These cousins, who aren't technically cousins though, and that's the best defense they can give you, who end up married. Coming in at 58, we have Daisy and Eddie from How I Live Now. Another case of cousins, however, these two are blood first cousins. How I Live Now is set in a post-apocalyptic world where American teenager Daisy is essentially trying to find her British family, her British cousins, to live with them. The world has been decimated, there's not many people left, and so she's trying to find the only family she has left. And she ends up falling for Eddie, who is one of her cousins. The only reason this is so low down on the list, considering they are cousins and blood cousins at that, is because the world that was given, the setting that was provided. There really isn't anyone else left on the planet Earth, and so I think it's meant to be more of a point of companionship and finding love where you can and comfort where you can than anything else. At least that's how I'm reading it, as a very generous look. Did they need to be cousins? No. Coming in at 57, we have Thomas and Lucille from Crimson Peak. This is another horror, and I will say that horror as a genre does lend itself to more shocking relationships like incest, and so it does fit within the genre more. However, I stand by the fact that the plot of Crimson Peak would work just the same were Thomas and Lucille not in an explicit sexual relationship that they are. They are blood siblings in an incestuous relationship, and they are essentially working to control and manipulate various people that Thomas brings home and essentially kill them and take their money. The control and the manipulation, however, still works even without the added effect of incest. I do think it works within the genre though. Coming in at 56, we have the Cullens from Twilight. None of these characters are related, woohoo! However, they do choose to present themselves to the whole world as an adopted family of a bunch of blended siblings who all date each other. Esme and Carlisle, the parents, essentially become the coolest foster parents ever who adopt children to date their other children. That is how the Cullens, whose main aim is to be secretive and forgettable, have decided to present themselves to the whole world. Can you honestly tell me that a single person in Forks is gonna forget that family? No! Coming in at 56, we have Cersei and Jaime from Game of Thrones. Okay, I get it. A lot of people are confused and they're wondering why this isn't at the top of the list where it should be and why it's in place 55, but I have my reasons, and it is because despite how horrifying this relationship is, and let me be clear, it is completely horrifying. These are full-blooded twins who are in a full-blown relationship together and procreate together. However, it is that exact reason that sets up the whole show. They almost have romantic moments together. They definitely have abusive moments together where they do hurt each other in different ways, but the abuse and the romance and the procreation is the entire setup for Game of Thrones. Their relationship, horrifying as it is essential to the show. And to be clear, I am speaking about the show here, I am not talking about the books. Coming in at 54, we have Howard and Jeannie from The Big Bang Theory. For those of you who have never watched The Big Bang Theory, Howard is the worst. He is the ickiest, grossest character on the planet. It's a miracle he ends up married to Bernadette. And his storyline with Jeannie just adds to that. Howard lost his virginity to his cousin, and his main defense to this throughout the whole show, because it does get brought up multiple times that he lost his virginity to his cousin, is that it was his second cousin, so it wasn't that bad. It is a pure gag. It really isn't that necessary. Howard's character is already disgusting enough. I don't think we needed the fact that he engaged in an incestuous relationship to add to that. It's just another case of sitcoms throwing that in there. Speaking of, coming in at 53, we have Jess and Robbie from New Girl. Jess is the main character of New Girl. Robbie is a character who is introduced at the very beginning of season 2 and continues throughout the whole show as a guest character. They don't start dating until I believe season 5 or 6. And once they start dating, they realize they're incredibly similar, until they find out that they are third cousins, and then they break up. This is an insane storyline, and I would argue not at all necessary to the plot in any capacity or any form whatsoever. They just needed a reason for Jess and Robbie to break up that didn't force either of them to do the breaking up themselves, because neither of these characters are the type of people to have broken up with anyone before. And so they put in this device of them being related as a way to forcibly break them up. But because this is just another case of a sitcom resorting to an incestuous relationship reveal, it felt tired and it felt lazy, and they could have done anything else to break them up, but they chose this. Coming in at 52, we have Betty and Jughead from Riverdale. Betty and Jughead date when they are teenagers. They do not realize that their parents had a relationship with each other when they were very young, when they themselves were teenagers. They also don't realize that their parents had a child together. And so Betty and Jughead find out much later on that they share a sibling. It's super unnecessary. It added nothing to the plot. And Betty and Jughead's parents dating really was just a way to put two hot people together for no reason whatsoever. It's not that horrifying because Betty and Jughead themselves aren't related, but come on. On a near identical vein, we have Dan and Serena from Gossip Girl in 51. Dan and Serena's parents have a relationship. They break up. Many years later, Dan and Serena are born, and then many years later, they get together. Dan and Serena are in a relationship. And then Dan and Serena's parents get back into a relationship. And then it is revealed that their parents had a child together. And that child is introduced and then immediately forgotten about. What is especially egregious about this storyline is that the whole point of Dan's character is that he is an outsider being brought into this world. And thus having his dad have a relationship with someone in this world before he even got to it, it just feels weird. Why? Why are we trying to connect all these characters? Why not introduce them as an organic way? It's also egregious because they completely forget about the sibling and never mention it again. Riverdale leans into this weirdness more. Gossip Girl is meant to have a bit more element of realism to it, and I say that with a pinch of salt, but they just forget about this sibling. Dan and Serena end up married together, and they have to just be aware that they share a sibling who they never speak to or never interact with. Coming in at number 50, we have Marty and Lorraine from Back to the Future. This is Marty and his mother. Marty is essentially flung back in time and meets his parents when they were teenagers, and he realizes his mistake when his mother starts coming onto him rather than his father, and his mother tries to sleep with him. To be fair to Marty, he does stop it because he's aware that it's his mother, but it is very much used as a pure gag. It doesn't add much to the plot. It is slightly relevant, so it's still lower down than some other cases, but ugh. In 49th, we have Cher and Josh from Clueless. Clueless is based on Emma by Jane Austen, where the titular character eventually marries her brother-in-law, which in itself at the time was seen as her sort of pseudo-brother, and so it's a little bit weird, but we have to remember the context of the 1800s, especially the early 1800s, is that it wasn't weird for family members to be marrying their sort of pseudo-family members, especially when they weren't actually related. They were marrying cousins at this point, so their relationship wasn't seen as weird in any capacity. Clueless is the modern remake of Emma. Cher and Josh are step-siblings, and what I don't think that Clueless understands is that Emma's relationship with her brother-in-law was not seen as really familial in a weird way, whereas step-siblings in the modern day getting together is a bit weirder. They didn't need to be step-siblings. He didn't need to be that much older than her. They didn't need to do that. Coming in at 48, and please correct me if I pronounce this woman's name wrong, we have Sam and Pilar from Lone Star. This is a film about acceptance of people and places that are usually covered in prejudice. These two characters want to date, but their parents are incredibly against it, and they don't really know why because these two characters are like middle-aged at this point. We later find out that they are half-siblings. However, Pilar can't have children, and so they essentially kind of decide that they will continue their relationship together because there's no risk of procreation, which is the main risk when thinking about incestuous relationships. It brings a very good argument to the table, but it feels more like pushing an agenda than actively wanting a discussion about this because the reveal is still used as a shock and at the very end of the film. And then there's not really any time to sit with that or sit with their decision. Coming in at 47, we have Kyle and Summer from The Young and the Restless. This is another soap opera. Kyle and Summer are not blood related, but they are raised as siblings from when they are very, very, very young. The whole show is a depiction of their on-again, off-again relationship, which features 2 marriages, 2 divorces, and co-parenting a child that isn't even Summer's. Coming in at 46, we have Haley and Manny from Modern Family. Another sitcom comes to the table. These 2 characters are not blood related, but they are related in all the ways that makes it count for the show. Manny's mother, Gloria, marries Jay, who is Haley's grandfather, which makes Manny essentially become Haley's uncle in a way. And she does refer to him as her Uncle Manny from time to time. Manny has a huge crush on Haley during the beginning seasons of the show, despite the fact that he is technically her uncle and there is an age discrepancy there. The main reason this is so high up is because it didn't help the plot at all. It just made Manny look like a creep. And Manny is meant to look like a weirdo. He's meant to be different. He's meant to be an outcast, but he's not meant to be creepy. And this didn't help that. It made him look creepy. It made him unlikable. Coming in at 45, we have Andrew and Cherry from Big Mouth. These 2 are cousins who flirt a lot. They're really big on teasing. And at one point, they even make out on their grandmother's bed. It is very in keeping with the salacious vibe of the show, but wow. Coming in at 44, we have Fry and Mildred from Futurama. Futurama is another adult cartoon, and in this case, Fry goes back in time, sleeps with his grandmother, and becomes his own grandfather. It works in the context of the show, but I think it is very important to note that Fry was aware that this was his grandmother when he slept with her. Coming in at 43, we have another sitcom entry with Garrett and Stacy from Community. This is a wedding episode. It's really cute. Garrett and Stacy get married, everything's beautiful, and then they find out that they are cousins. And they do decide to stay married. Community is very much a show that kind of like subverts your idea of what a sitcom could be. There's never really a proper linear plot. It's all a bit wacky to the extreme. It tugs on tropes and bends them and flips them on their heads, and that is, I think, what this storyline is attempting to do by having an incestuous relationship and going, nope, all good, we'll continue on. But I do think it's a point in sitcoms where incest is used so often as a gag that it doesn't subvert the genre as much as I think they thought it would. Coming in at 42, we have an entry that is here exclusively, really, for how unnecessary it is. Nicole and Chase with Drive Me Crazy. This is a rom-com film about 2 teenagers who might get together and then they do at the end and it's all beautiful, and then at the very, very end, they find out that their parents are starting to date and that they have to live like siblings. There was 0 reason for this plot to be included other than a funny final gag for the film. It didn't add anything. It was just a big why. Why? Coming in at 41, we have Jace and Clary from Shadowhunters. Jace and Clary are 2 characters who meet each other, they kiss, they make out, they have a lot of attraction to each other, and then they find out that they are blood siblings. And so they stop their relationship because horrifying. But they can't just get rid of that attraction. So the next couple of books of them realizing that they're still attracted to each other, but they can't do anything about it. And they do eventually find out that they aren't blood siblings. All is good in the world again. However, they do start up a romantic relationship again and a romantic interaction before they find out that they aren't blood siblings. And you know what? I ate it up when I was 13 years old. These star-crossed lovers who couldn't be together because of a silly thing like DNA. Coming in at number 40, we have Strands and Fairchild from Blades of Glory. This is a comedy film about figure skating, and it features these 2 twins who are in a very weird relationship with each other. At the end of the film, they do end up kissing, and I think it's more just to hammer home how weird and incestuous their relationship was, but I don't think it needed the kiss. I think their relationship was weird enough as it is without adding that actual explicit part of incest. Coming in at 39, we have Roman, Annie, and Leafa from Hemlock Grove. Roman, Annie, and Leafa are all siblings in some type of way. They are all kind of related with each other, and both girls have a full-on relationship with Roman. It should be noted that Hemlock Grove is a horror show, and as I said with horror before, incestuous relationships do fit the genre a little bit more than other shows, but this is still insane. These relationships are portrayed as shocking, which is definitely a factor of the genre. However, they are also portrayed as romantic, which is not a factor of the genre, because it is meant to be more uncomfortable than anything else. However, when you add the romance into it, it becomes a bit of a question mark. Coming in at 38, we have Mike and Maggie from 17 again. This is like Back to the Future, but in reverse. It is about a father who is turned back into his 17-year-old self, but in present day. He goes to high school and he tries to fix his kids' lives, but in doing so, he gets really close to his daughter to the point where she starts coming on to him. They never do anything explicit. He does stop it, but the main reason it is higher than Back to the Future is because Mike eggs this on. He knows that he is presenting as a 17-year-old boy, and the way that he treats his daughter is very much not how a 17-year-old boy would treat a girl unless he was interested in her. So it gets 38th place because of how much of an idiot he is. Coming in at 37, we have the second entry from this sitcom, Ross and Cassie from Friends. I know a lot of people don't like Ross's character, but you do have to wonder if the writers also hated Ross's character for some of the storylines they gave him. Cassie is Ross and Monica's cousin, and she comes to stay with Ross for a little while, and Ross is absolutely stunned by her. He thinks she's the most attractive woman he's seen. He's floored. And so throughout this whole episode, he has a full-blown crush on her, and then he tries to make a move on her, to which she is, rightfully so, horrified. It is very much played as a gag, and it's meant to be funny, but I don't think it comes across as funny. I don't think it's effective as a gag. It's super unnecessary, and kind of like Manny in Modern Family, portrays Ross as a creep more than anything else. Coming in at 36, we have Kane and Charity from Emmerdale. The Dingle family have various incestuous relationships. Kane and Charity are just one of them. They are blood cousins, either first or second, and they are fully aware that they are related. They have dalliances on and off throughout the entire show. They have a kid together. They end up having grandkids together. It is about as incestuous as you can really get for cousins. Coming in at 35, we have Barry and Iris from The Flash. In this TV show, Barry and Iris are raised together from when they are children, and then they get into a romantic relationship. They're not actually blood related, and I know what you're thinking. This doesn't seem that bad. It seems quite similar to previous ones and much further down on the list. But the problem with this is that Barry and Iris were not raised together in the comics. This was purely added for the TV show. It's also worth noting that their father sees them both as his children, getting together and getting married. Coming in at 34, we have Saxton and Lachlan from The White Lotus. These two are brothers in a full-blown sexual relationship, and it felt like for shock value and nothing more. The White Lotus does this a lot with certain relationships. They love the shock value. They use it as a plot device throughout the entire show. After a while, the shock value falls flat a little bit though. Coming in at 33, we have Steve and Sharon from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Before comic people come at me, this is the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and I am going to reference you guys, don't worry. Steve and Sharon are together in the comic books. He is not with Peggy. But when we get to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Steve and Peggy are established as having a romantic relationship with each other. Later down the line with Steve is in the future, they try to make the films a little bit more comic book accurate. And to do this, they had Steve and Sharon get together. However, this doesn't work in the Marvel Cinematic Universe as well, because Sharon is Peggy's niece. This storyline was absolutely slated because he was essentially getting with his former love interest's niece, and later on, after they had dropped the Steve-Sharon storyline, Steve goes back in time to be with Peggy, essentially meaning that he had also gotten with his niece in a way. He becomes the uncle of the girl he made out with. Coming in at 32, we have Emmeline and Richard from the Blue Lagoon. Emmeline and Richard are two children who get stranded on a desert island, and over the years, they've come together for the most natural form of love. They are cousins, but there's no need for them to be. The main plot of the film is to show the most natural form of love, that when two people only have each other, they will naturally become companions. But they didn't need to be related for this. I think it's meant to add another layer, but it didn't need it. They're super young. The message comes across even if they aren't cousins. In 31st place, we have Loki and Sylvie from Loki. In the series Loki is the titular character, and he essentially has to deal with all these alternate universes, going through them, where he meets alternate versions of himself. Sylvie is one of these versions. And I am 99% sure that the only reason they distinguished Sylvie and gave her a different name, despite the fact that all other alternates of Loki have some form of Loki in their name, was to show her as a love interest, was to distinguish her as different enough to be a love interest. While this isn't technically incest, it's more self-cest, it does kind of fall into that sort of umbrella, and so I'm including it here. It was so unnecessary. Them having a romantic relationship was not needed for the plot in any capacity. The kiss was not needed. Their relationship was already complicated enough as it is. They could have become found family. They didn't have to become lovers. And I understand that a lot of people defend it because they say that Loki is that type of character. He's almost like narcissist. He can only really ever fall in love with himself, and that is to show that. But I don't think it needed to be done in this way. I think they did it in a way that made it so heteronormative that it could be palatable to the majority of audiences. And I don't think that was necessary or effective. Coming in at number 30, we have the second entry from this universe, Polly and Jason from Riverdale. This was purely shock value. The plot of Riverdale had, for lack of better words, completely lost the plot by this point. They're third cousins. Not awful, not great. They have a child together. It is used as a reveal that they were related. It's crazy, it's just, oh god, Riverdale. Whatever the writers of Riverdale were taking, let me know. I would love to try some. Coming in at 29, we have Leonardo and Karai from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. In the original version of this show, these two are not adoptive siblings, and they do have a romantic dynamic with each other. It is very much kind of implicit rather than explicit, but it's very there. In the reboot, for reasons unknown to everyone, they make them adoptive siblings, very similar to the Barry and Iris of it all. However, there's no need for this in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. They also keep the romantic element between the two characters. Coming in at 28, we have Toby and Jenna from Pretty Little Liars. These two characters are step siblings, and like most storylines in Pretty Little Liars, it is very dark and done with the critical lens of a 5th grader. Jenna does abuse Toby, that does need to be said. It is a very toxic, not often consensual, abusive relationship that does lean into sexual, and it sets up their dynamic for the show. However, it is not well explored, it is very quickly forgotten about, and there's nothing more that can really be said about it because it's just dead. Next up in 27th, we have Catherine and Sebastian from Cruel Intentions. Cruel Intentions is a film based on the play Dangerous Liaisons. Their counterparts in the play are not related. In the film version, Catherine and Sebastian are step siblings, and they essentially kind of like have some sort of like deal with each other and make bets with each other to kind of emotionally hurt and seduce other people, with the idea that if Sebastian is successful in this, Catherine will sleep with him, give him what he's finally always wanted. It's done to make their relationship taboo and outlandish, similar to how their character counterparts in the original play were being perceived, but I don't think it was entirely necessary. Coming in 26th position, we have Damon and Rhaenyra from House of the Dragon. 26th position, you say? This relationship, how horrifying it was, I know. However, unfortunately, incredibly necessary to the plot of House of the Dragon. What is unforgivable about Damon and Rhaenyra is how much they were actually shipped by the fandom, how they were presented as almost a romantic relationship. He is her uncle by significant amount of years. They get together when she's quite young, and that's the whole point of the Targaryens, is that they are meant to be this kind of incestuous family. We were expecting that going into House of the Dragon, knowing it was going to focus on the Targaryens. We knew there was going to be incest, but the way that it was portrayed, the way that people shipped them, the way that people wanted them to get together, it was why? Incredibly necessary to the plot. Heinous way of depicting it. Coming in at 25, we have Shannon and Boone from Lost. These are step siblings who were raised together from when they were children, and then they sleep together when they're a lot older. Completely gross, completely unnecessary. Shannon's manipulative, Boone is obsessive, they are dysfunctional to their core, and no one liked that plot. No one thought it was needed. Coming in at 24, we have Allison and Luther from the Umbrella Academy. This is yet another example of an incestuous relationship that was not present in the original material that was then brought into the reboot for some reason. Allison and Luther are not blood related-ish, but they are raised together as siblings from when they are incredibly young. In the comics, it was Diego and Vanya who were in this relationship. No one is really clear on why the show went in this direction with Allison and Luther, especially since Allison assaults Luther at one point. It's horrific. And it was fundamentally not needed. They were also a couple who was presented as being incredibly romantic throughout season 1 until they got a lot of backlash from that. Coming in at 23, we have Mimi and Jack from Blue Bloods. In this world, there are these things called bond mates, these eternal soulmates who are often reincarnated reincarnated throughout time. And in this case, Mimi and Jack are bondmates who are reincarnated into the form of twins. Mimi wants to continue on with this being a bondmate with Jack. Jack wants to be a bondmate with a girl who is his other sister. It is very strange that bondmates in this world keep getting reincarnated as blood siblings. I'm not sure if there is actually an explanation for this or why it's so prevalent in vampiric media, but it is a thing that makes it incredibly uncomfortable to read, that these twin siblings want to be more than that, want to have an inherently romantic connection together. Coming in at number 22, we have Jonathan and Rose from Bored to Death. At the very end of the show, Bored to Death, Jonathan discovers that the person that he has been dating, Rose, is his half-sibling from a sperm donor. This is in the finale, and Jonathan decides not to tell Rose and instead to continue the relationship, and the final thing that we really see is them kissing, wondering what's gonna happen with their relationship. It's meant to be a comedic take on incest, but why? Coming in at 21, we have Bray and Tammy from Red Dead Redemption. Another video game. In this one, we have Bray and Tammy. They are very much minor characters. They are siblings that the main characters meet. They live on a farm, they're in a sexual relationship, and they die. The reason this is so egregious is because it feeds more into stereotypes than anything else. Coming in at number 20, we're on the final 20 now, we have Penelope and Clifford from Riverdale, the third entry from this show. The entire Blossom family is completely unhinged, and in the flashback episode where the teenagers in the original show play their parent counterparts in the past, we find out just how unhinged the Blossom family always has been. Penelope is the mother. She married into the family, but she always refers to the family as her own, which has often made viewers a little bit confused. And then we find out that Penelope, when she was very young, was adopted into the family to essentially be a sister companion to Clifford. And then later on, they get married. Why? Why? In 19th place, we have Lucy and Ray from Dallas. This relationship is absolutely infamous. It is a sexual relationship between Lucy and Ray that has a significant age gap from the very beginning that already made people a little uncomfortable, already was looked at with a bit of a taboo. And then much later down the line, after their relationship has ended, I believe, we find out that Ray is Lucy's uncle. We can tell that this was not necessary to the plot because the writers forget about it almost immediately. No one wanted to revisit the fact that uncle and niece had slept together, had a relationship together. No one wanted to revisit that. It was immediately chucked out the window. Coming in 18th place, we have another vampire entry with Rebecca and Marcel from the originals. These two characters meet when Rebecca is incredibly old and Marcel is incredibly young. It should be noted that Marcel is seen as like the adoptive-ish son of Klaus, who is Rebecca's brother. Marcel grows up and then him and Rebecca start dating. It is a bit weird because she did know him when he was like a child, like 8 or 9. Klaus then forces Marcel to choose between Rebecca and becoming immortal, and promptly after, Klaus stabs his sister, freezing her in a sort of coma-like state for the next 200 years. When Rebecca emerges from her coma and she meets Marcel again, they do get together, and they do end up staying together throughout the rest of the show. Their beginnings are icky on a number of levels, and I do think that the incest is probably the least icky part of it. It is more to do with the age discrepancy and the age gap between them. However, she is almost seen as an aunt figure to him, and therefore it does get quite high up on this list, and mainly because it is so unnecessary. I don't think it was needed. I think they could have introduced it in a different way. Rebecca didn't even need to really know Marcel until he was an adult. I don't know why she had to know him when he was younger. I don't know why she had to be introduced as an aunt figure to him. Coming in at 17, we have another vampiric entry with Eric and Nora from True Blood. In this universe, when vampires turn people, that person essentially becomes their child, their vampiric child, and their children can refer to each other as siblings, but there's no need for this. They're not forced to, they don't often do this. However, Eric and Nora, who are in a relationship together, do. And you really have to ask why. They are in a full-blown sexual relationship, they fully refer to each other as brother and sister, and they are seen as both brother and sister and in a sexual relationship. So, coming in at 16, we have Deborah and Dexter from Dexter. Talk about an infamous and horrifying storyline that absolutely nobody was a fan of. Deborah and Dexter are step-siblings. They are platonic throughout pretty much the entirety of the show, until much later on when Deborah starts expressing romantic feelings towards Dexter. This got the top marks for unnecessary, because it was not needed. It didn't help the plot. It made Deborah a hateable character, which was in itself unnecessary. Not a single person in the universe liked this storyline, and it shouldn't have gotten past the writer's room. And I'm kind of horrified that it did. People still talk about it to this day. Coming in at 15, we have everyone from the show Dark. This is a German Netflix show that uses time travel, and as a happenstance, characters often get into sexual relationships with relatives without even realizing it. Initially, this was an incredibly useful form of shock value and added to more tragic backstories. However, now it is fully overused and it has lost that effect. Incest is now just used as a boilerplate tragic backstory to any love story in the show, and it isn't good anymore. It isn't effective. Coming in at 14, we have Lou and Valerio from Elite. Elite is a Spanish show that liked looking at pretty much any form of relationship possible and really delving into the horrors of all of them. And Lou and Valerio are pretty much the epitome of that. They are half siblings in a full-blown sexual relationship. They even have sort of borderline romantic moments. They don't want their father, their shared father, I should say, to find out about this. And when he does, he is absolutely horrified. It's shock value and romantic and not at all explored well. It doesn't even end well. Coming in at 13, we have Top Dollar and Micah from The Crow. These are half siblings in a full incestuous relationship. Their relationship is revealed halfway through the film and adds nothing. These two characters are already toxic, already enabling of their worst habits, already heinous and horrid. Adding the fact that they are in an incestuous relationship doesn't make them engaging to watch anymore. It actually makes you just want to turn off the TV, which is not an effective use of a reveal. Coming in at number 12, we have Clary and Jonathan from Shadowhunters. You might remember Clary and Jace from earlier, these two blood siblings who weren't actually blood siblings. Well, this is pretty much a repeat of that storyline, except with actual blood siblings. Clary and her real-life brother, Jonathan. This storyline is essentially copy-paste, and it's meant to show the manifestation of evil in Jonathan, but I don't think it needed to be done this way. And the strangest part about it is that it's meant to show Jonathan as being this heinous, horrible character compared to our hero, Jace, but in fact, it actually almost gives him a sort of relatability to Jace, because Jace also was attracted to Clary while they thought they were siblings, so it makes them almost entwined rather than separate. Coming in at number 11, we have Quentin and Kit from Nip Tuck. These are minor characters who are revealed to be in an incestuous relationship and then run off together. They're meant to be villains. They didn't really add anything to the show. They kind of had a bit of a storyline that was then immediately forgotten about, and every character was just kind of like, oh, we found that out and then they disappeared. Great. And kicking off our top 10, we have Sam and Hannah from How to Get Away with Murder. Super unnecessary. Frank's parentage has always been a bit of a question mark in the show. No one really knows who it is. And then we find out at the very end that he is a product of an incestuous relationship between siblings. This then leads to a series of events that people have been complaining about for years to come. It is pure shock value that enraged people in a way that was not at all effective. And in number 9, we have the second entry from this universe, Cece and Jason from Pretty Little Liars. Cece is, for lack of better words, and excuse my language, one of the most fucked up characters in this show. She already had so much going on with her, so many bad things, so many horrible storylines and things they added to her character that made genuine people really uncomfortable. They didn't need this. Cece knew that she was dating her brother when she was dating him, but he didn't. And I'm sure somewhere in the weird scheme of things, it was plot relevant. But it really wasn't. So much of Pretty Little Liars went off the rails that they could have taken out one thing and slotted in another crazy thing and it would have worked completely fine either way. Coming in at number 8, we have Jax and Trinity from Sons of Anarchy. Jax and Trinity are half siblings who almost but don't have sex. Other characters in the show have known this for a while, that these two characters are half siblings, and they have watched them grow closer together and not intervened. We know that they're half siblings. It is pure shock value because the writers clearly wanted that moment where they almost had sex when it didn't actually make sense to the plot. Coming in at number 7, we have an Adam Sandler film, Jamie and Chad with That's My Boy. This is so unnecessary. It's an example of a comedy film using incest as a gag, and it doesn't land. Jamie and Chad are siblings and they're in a full-blown sexual relationship, and it doesn't really add much because we find out later that the big lie that Chad had wasn't about him sleeping with his sibling, but was about him lying about being in the army. But haha, he's sleeping with his sister. Coming in at number 6, we have Sienna and Dodger from Hollyoaks. Considering we also had Hollyoaks significantly further down on the list with a storyline that they did significantly better than this is hilarious. Sienna and Dodger are full-blooded twins who aren't aware of this until after they have a child together. They find out they're related, and then Sienna still wants to pursue a relationship with Dodger. She's become so ingrained in him and entangled with him, she still wants that relationship. Their child also becomes a villain later on, which feels more like it's pushing something than anything else. Coming in at number 5, we have Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver from the Marvel Ultimate Universe. Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver are full-blooded siblings. They are often portrayed in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the Marvel Comic Universe in various forms. In the Marvel Ultimate Universe, this shows an alternate reality where Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver are siblings still, but in a full-blown incestuous relationship. It's not dealt with great, and when it's revealed, she dies. So there's no chance to even explore it further. There's even a scene where they're having sex in the woods and their father, Wolverine in this universe, is watching on. Coming in at number 4, we have Nat and Georgia from Brookside. This one takes the cake for the worst case of incest in a soap opera. This is a UK soap opera, and it features these two full-blooded siblings who have been raised like siblings from birth, then later on engaging in a sexual relationship. This was in the 80s, so this was incredibly shocking. The producer had to come out and apologize for this storyline. UK politicians were asked to comment on this storyline. It was so incredibly unnecessary, didn't add much, and was just horrendous to watch. And now we're at the podium. Coming in at number 3, we have Josh and Diane from Future Man. This is a very unknown sci-fi drama with Josh Hutcherson, and it is wacky. It's a kind of similar premise to Back to the Future, where Josh is sent back in time and essentially has to save the world from cyborgs, not relevant to Back to the Future, but in this he also has to make sure his parents get together. He meets a lot of family members. He's aware that he's meeting family members, so it doesn't really make sense how he can accidentally sleep with his mother. Especially since he's been talking to his dad so often. He knows who his mother is. He knows what his mother kind of looks like, just maybe not as a teenager. Anyway, he ends up sleeping with her. Completely unnecessary, completely ridiculous, didn't help the plot at all, just made everyone uncomfortable. Even Josh, he did throw up afterwards, but Christ! Coming in at number 2, we have Alex and Miranda from Chances Are. Not a lot of people know this Robert Downey Jr. movie, and if you don't know it, don't watch it. Louis is a man who is married to a woman. They have a child, and then Louis dies. Very sad. But it's good because he is reincarnated pretty quickly into the body of a baby called Alex. Alex doesn't have any memory of Louis. Alex grows up. He is a great guy, and then he starts dating this girl called Miranda. And when Miranda takes him home, he starts seeing all these pictures of Louis. And then he remembers that he is actually Louis and that Miranda is his daughter. And then it gets really convoluted. There's a scene where Alex/Louis asks Miranda, "Hey, what do you want most in the world?" And she responds, "My father." And he just looks like, "Great, that's me." Huh. There's also a scene where Alex/Louis then tries to sleep with his ex-wife widow mother figure. The mother also realizes that Alex/Louis is actually her husband and then is kind of encouraging in this and like, "Oh my god, great!" To boil it down, it's a film about a father dating his daughter. Eventually, Alex/Louis does forget that he is Louis and just becomes Alex and then continues the relationship with Miranda into the infinite world. I know what you're thinking, this sounds incredibly relevant to the plot, and you're right, it is relevant to the plot. I don't think it's relevant to have even existed. I don't think this film was necessary to have ever been made. And coming in, topping the list of 100 examples of incest in media, we have Jon Snow and Daenerys from Game of Thrones. Woo! It's horrific! This is an aunt-uncle reveal, and it is everything wrong that could possibly go wrong. Jon Snow and Daenerys are two characters who don't really interact throughout the first few seasons of Game of Thrones, but everyone kind of thinks they should be together. The audience, mainly. And this is egged on by the writers, and then they start getting together, and everyone realizes this is going to be really cute, this is going to be a great little romance. And it is really presented as an epic love as the final of the show starts coming to play. As the final season, as the final episode, it all leads up, and they get together, and it's beautiful. And then, as they are having sex, it is revealed that Jon Snow is Daenerys' nephew, that she is his aunt by blood. There is a significant amount of incest in the Game of Thrones world. However, this is not plot relevant. This was not needed. And more crucially, it is not even confirmed in the books. So there was no basis for this in the source material. This was purely the writers going off on their own in the final season thinking, why don't we add even another thing to make this the worst season of television ever? It is so horrifying and it was so unnecessary. It was portrayed as romantic while also being incredibly incestuous. It had no basis. It didn't help the plot in any capacity. If anything, it presented these characters as worse than who they actually were. There is a lot of unforgivable things in that final season of Game of Thrones, but that really does sort of top the cake. What they did to Daenerys' character, including her relationship with Jon Snow, unforgivable. Incest in media! Thank you for joining me for the 100 examples of incest in media and how horrifying they are and how unnecessary they are. I hope this sheds some light on how overused it is in media these days, and to a point where it's not needed. It's a very horrifying thing. Incest is quite an intense thing to be portraying. It is often a form of abuse, it is often quite dark, and it is used very lightly as a gag, as a throwaway, as for shock value, and I don't think it should be. I think it should be portrayed with a more sensitive light, and so I hope this gives that sort of impression. Thank you for watching. I will be doing more lists, maybe not as extensive as this one.